Hello everyone, how's it going? Today I wanted to talk about the submittal process. If you're like me and you're just starting in the industry and maybe you've been asked to do a submittal, you might be wondering, what is this? And so I wanted to create a video to kind of help you through the process. Um, so in general terms, a submittal is an architect's blessing on an item before a contractor purchases it. And so when an architect and engineer designs a project, they design the project with a certain type of material or sometimes a specific material in mind. And the submittal process is their way of guaranteeing the contractor purchases that exact material. Now, it's actually beneficial for both parties because it also reduces risk from the contractor. And the third benefit is that it's kind of a final coordination between the architect and maybe their subconsultants, an electrical engineer, a structural engineer, a mechanical engineer. It's a final check before the proverbial trigger is pulled. So the process is as follows. Let's say, for example, that I'm a general contractor. I've hired a subcontractor to, let's say, install a specific type of pump. Maybe this is a water treatment plant. I'm going to reach out to my subcontractor. I want to know exactly the type of pump they plan on using, and what their method is for installing it in the ground. Maybe it's through anchor bolts. The subcontractor is going to send me product data, maybe brochures, maybe information. It's going to be pages and pages of info on that type of pump, what the flows look like, what the size is, how it gets installed, any type of performance, and also warranty criteria. They're going to send it to me, the general contractor. Now, as the GC, I'm going to review that document. I'm going to review that information and check it against the specifications. And see if there's any issues. If there are any issues, I'll go back to them and ask them to correct it. Maybe they need to find a different type of pump. If I see no issues, then I'll put it all together. I'll put my name on that document, and I'll send it to the architect. The architect will receive that information. Now, an architect doesn't necessarily have a ton of expertise over pumps. Maybe some do, but they don't have an engineering license. And so they'll reach out to their mechanical engineer and review that information together. And if everything looks good, it's in conformance with the specs, perfect, it's going to get approved, and my subcontractor now has permission to purchase that specific pump. And so when we talk about approval with specifications, there's a few things we need to go over. Very rarely will an architect actually say approved on a set of on a submittal. And the reason they won't is because the architect is taking on a lot of risk with this item. And so if they do say approved, all it really means is that the product is within conformance to the specifications. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best product for the project. It doesn't mean that the product is even safe, or that it's a complete guarantee for safety, although that will be a consideration in their design. All it means is that it conforms with the project specifications. And so sometimes instead of approved, you might see other notes. The most common one that I've seen is no exceptions taken, which means in essence, we don't necessarily disagree with this product, and so we're going to allow it to be used. Sometimes you'll see a product that says approved with comments. All that means is that maybe there's a small correction that needs to happen. It's not worth the effort of going back and redoing everything. Just make a small change and then go ahead and purchase it, and then also accept it, which is similar to no exceptions taken. It's just that it's accepted. It's following the project specifications and nothing more. So what happens if a submittal is rejected? Well, rejected is rare, but it does happen. I've seen it in some of the unique facets of construction that I've worked in. But the two main reasons that I've seen submittals just flat out be rejected, excuse me. One is that the design has changed so much that that product is no longer relevant. And maybe that's, let's say, for example, that I'm building a commercial building. It has a tower on top of it. That tower has originally a steel grid, and while I'm working on that submittal, another product comes in that the architect likes even more, and let's say that it's a carbon fiber structural grid, and it's lighter, it maybe is cheaper, and the architect wants to go with that instead. That carbon fiber grid was not in the specifications, but they will revise the specifications to make sure that it's included. And so if I send in my steel grid submittal, they're going to go ahead and just reject it because that's no longer the plan. It's nothing personal against me, the contractor. It's just that the plan has changed. And sometimes, very rarely, but this very rarely happens, but it does happen. It could be that I've made my submittal and it's just not even close. It's incorrect. There's a ton of risk if the architect even remotely looks at it positively, and they just may reject it, and then they'll give me a call and tell me what to do differently. That doesn't happen often, but it does happen. More often than not, if a submittal is rejected, they're going to put a note that says revise and resubmit, which means that you were close, but there are changes that need to happen. And usually there's going to be comments in the product data or in the shop drawing or somewhere that gives you an indication of what you need to change before you resubmit your specification. And I should note, it's not uncommon to have 3, 4, maybe 5 revisions of specifications before they finally get approved. Again, this is the architect taking on a ton of liability, and so they generally want to be sure that the submittal is being done correctly. So now that we've gone all over that, what are the types of submittals that are being sent to the architect? Well, the most common one you're going to see is called product data, and that's where there's no additional design required. This is, more often than not just material that needs to be approved. And so that could go anywhere from paint color or even paint itself, what type of paint we're going to use. It could be insulation, it could be drywall, it could be steel stud types, it could be wood stud types if it's a prescriptive specification. You might also see product data for pipes and valves and cable trays where there might be a little bit of design in the product data, but really it's up to the contractor to install it as long as it follows the requirements. And so you'll see information on chemical makeup, paint, for example. You're going to be really concerned about VOCs, which is volatile organic compounds. Most projects will have a requirement on that. It's an environmental issue, and so on and so forth. The second type of submittal is called a shop drawing. You may have heard that term if you're getting started in the industry. That's essentially a design that is so specific that a general architect or a general engineer, structural or mechanical or electrical, they don't really want to work on that. They'll reach out to a subcontractor, or rather the general contractor will reach out to the subcontractor. They will reach out to their own engineer, and they will design something very specific. A common example of this is maybe anchor bolts. We're going back to our pump, if the pump requires a very specific type of anchor bolt, there's going to be a structural engineer that will design those anchor bolts. They're going to provide calculations on how they got to their design. They're going to submit that with the pump shop drawings, the pump submittal, and those designs, those calculations have to get approved before we can purchase the pump and before we can purchase those anchor bolts. And the last type is a sample. This is a physical sample of a product that the architect will inspect in person before you can purchase it. And so if any of you have worked with GFRC panels, which is glass fiber reinforced concrete panels, architects will want to test the waterproofing and how it reacts to rain and water penetration. You may have a certain type of millwork, you may have a certain type of interior window or exterior window that the architect wants to look at and test and inspect in person in an office before you can purchase it on site. And so they're going to want a sample. There's usually strict requirements on samples, and so make sure you follow those. So if you're new to the industry, if you're just now doing submittals, where should you get started? How do you work on this process? So the first place you should look is always the specifications. Division 1, usually at the very front of the specifications, will have requirements on submittals, and so they may say something to the effect of that we want this type of information, we want a cover sheet, we want the general contractor to have some sort of stamp acknowledging that they've looked at the submittal. Sometimes they'll want some sort of indication that you've checked each requirement within the specifications to the product data. Whatever it is, there's going to be requirements and instructions in the submittals to include with your specifications. Now, if it's not in the specs, there could be an outside document. So instructions just as a separate document, project manual, which is kind of just part of the overall, project documents. It could even be in the contract between the general contractor and the owner. And so make sure you understand which documents have instructions on how to do submittals. The second thing to look at when you're looking at specifications is to look at whether it's a prescriptive or performance specification. And so very high level, a prescriptive specification is a specific item. It's a specific requirement. No outside calculations have to go into it. And so if we are looking at, for example, studs, steel studs or wood studs, they might say, we want 2x6 studs, 18 inches on center or 16 inches on center. Perfect. They may also say, we want this type of backing, we want this type of furring channel. Whatever it is, it's prescriptive. You don't need to go to a third engineer outside of the architect or the engineer because that's what it is. And so when you turn in product data, all it has to be are the general the specific products that they're asking for. Another example of prescriptive specifications would be a specific type of pump, a specific type of mechanical unit, anything like that. Now, the other type of specification is called a performance specification. And so instead of saying we want 6-inch studs, 16 inches on center, they're going to say something to the effect of we want, steel studs to conform to these types of loads, to this type of structural design. Maybe it's an interior non-bearing wall, but we still, want to follow this type of criteria. If it's a pump, it's going to follow this type of flow, this type of wattage, things like that. And so if it's a prescriptive specification, usually the submittal process is way faster. If it's a performance specification, less thought went into the actual design of the specifications, which allows you to start construction faster, but it takes a little bit more time during construction to get to the right material. All right, and things to consider when we're working on submittals. And so if we're just starting on a project, it's day one, you want to know which submittals to do first. Look at the project schedule and look at long lead items. And so maybe reach out to your subcontractors, figure out what the lead items are or the long lead items are for your projects or for your project. It could be that if you have an 18-month project and your mechanical units take 13 months to essentially get to the project site, you can't purchase them until you have approved submittals. And so maybe that's one of the first submittals you work on before anything else. If it's the beginning of a project, your first submittals would be probably a rebar shop drawing or some sort of item affecting the foundation. And with all that said, keep track of the schedule. A really good project manager will generally understand which submittals have to happen in which order. And so they may even create a checklist or a schedule of when certain submittals are completed or when they'd like them to be completed. Just a word of caution, a word of advice. Architects really like it when general contractors are not adversarial with them. And so if you can work with the designer, work with the owner, and really be seen as a partner, it's going to make the project so much easier. And so if you have hiccups with your submittals, if you have questions, reach out to the architect and also take a little bit of time to understand their side of things. My experience with architects and submittals is that architects are always busy with submittals. They're always swamped. And so if you can build a good relationship with them and show a little bit of sympathy, understand where they're coming from, they're generally going to be a lot more willing to work with you versus if you're just, kind of mean or kind of unsympathetic to their situation. So the third thing is keep a log of your submittals. It's super creative in the industry. It's just called a submittal log. Most project managers will have some sort of template for a submittal log, but as you start the project, get an idea of which submittals you need. Sometimes the architect will actually have that. It's rare, but it does happen. It's always worth asking. But keep a log of all your submittals of what's happened, what's currently happening, who has the responsibility of the submittal. So if I've had to resend it to my subcontractor, I need to keep note of that, or if I have something to do before I can send it to the architect, that should be noted. And then also dates, especially dates on when the submittal has to be processed. And just a tip, if you're working in the field as a project engineer or a project manager, it's always a good idea to review the submittal log before your AOC meetings, your architect, owner, contractor meetings. Usually that's something that comes up, and so if you have those answers off the top of your head, it just puts you that much further ahead. And that's all I've got for today. Thank you so much.